So would y'all like to hear a story this evening?
Yes.
Well, when I was young, my dad just fascinated me. I loved to just follow him around and watch him. He was one of those guys that was always on the move, always had an improvement project of some kind, doing something to make life better. And he always used these real interesting looking tools. And they made these cool noises, and they looked really dangerous. I mean, what more could a little boy ask? One of my earliest memories was him covering the vents on the house. See, where we lived, it was hot. I mean, real hot. And out in our house, we lived in a little cracker box out by the airport underneath the power lines. And we had these big eaves and these vents in the eaves of the house. Help keep it cool in the summer. And so every fall, Dad had to cover the vents, and every spring he had to take the covers off. And he'd take these big triangles made of wood, big old things. They were more than 6 feet wide. He'd put the ladder up against the house, and he'd wrangle that big old cover all by himself up that ladder, get it up over the vent. And then he had this kind of plunger screwdriver thing. He'd just go up there and he'd zip that screw right in, 2 or 3 of them. Then he had to move the ladder. A normal person, climb down the ladder, move the ladder, climb up the ladder, put in the next screw, but not my dad. No, he liked to be more efficient than that. So he would tuck himself in real close to that ladder, and he'd just... See, Dad was not what you would call a safety man. And the time I remember had to be one of the first times I saw him do it. See, it was the close of the 1960s. And first time I'd seen him do it, so I asked him, "What you doing?" He just smiled at me. He said, "I'm getting ready for a visitor." It was in August. Kind of early to be doing that, but I didn't know that. My mother, she was talking about someone coming to visit too. And she was rushing around the house, putting things away and giving chores to my older brother and my older sister. And, you know, they were talking about somebody coming to visit, and I could tell from the name that it was a woman coming. So I figured it was one of my aunts. Y'all know about aunts? Well, you're laughing. See, out here, you only got one word for parental female siblings. In the rural South, see, my people are from the rural South. In the rural South, we got 3 classes of parental female siblings. We got aunts, we got aunts, and we got aunts. And see, aunts, that's your run-of-the-mill parental female sibling. When I was a kid, aunts, well, they wore house dresses, and they'd send you a dollar bill every year for your birthday. Yeah, it was wrapped up in tinfoil. You know, so as the postman wouldn't be tempted. I don't know why you're laughing. Did y'all not get those dollar bills wrapped in tinfoil? You must not have been good. So anyway, they lived in a house, usually back in the country, and they'd have hard floors that were real easy to clean. And then aunts, well, an aunt, she would wear her good clothes just around the house. Yeah, we'd all talk about it too. You know, they get home and they're still wearing their good clothes at home. They'd wear their Sunday go-to-meeting clothes every day of the week. And they lived in houses in the county seat over in New Albany. And they had nice soft floors, that wall-to-wall carpeting. You could lay down and almost take a nap on those floors. It was nice. And then there's aunts. Yeah. Well, I always heard that aunts live in mansions with servants, but I never met one. See, in my family, we pretty much just had aunts. And what aunts we had, I'm going to talk to you about some of them. I need to tell you, though, even though I was born in New Orleans, all my family is from rural Mississippi, so that's really more what I know. And we had, we had Aunt Willeen and Aunt Jolene, and then we had Jonelle, but you didn't call her Aunt Jonelle, because she had one of those couples names. You know, you always had to mention Jimmy and Jonelle. You couldn't just call one or the other. There was no Uncle Jimmy. It was Jimmy and Jonelle. It was never Jonelle and Jimmy either. It was always Jimmy and Jonelle. And then we had the two name aunts. We had Aunt Addie Lou and Aunt Lily Bell and Aunt Addie. No, I did Aunt Addie Lou, didn't I? And then Aunt Callie Florence. And then we had the double Bettys. You know, in those days, every family had a double Betty. And my family, we were particularly blessed because we had two. We had double Bettys. And they made it tough on a little guy, too, because they lived together. So you couldn't just say Aunt Betty. They'd just look at you funny and couldn't figure out who you were talking to. Made it kind of tough. And then among these aunts, we had an aunt with just the best name of any aunt I ever heard of in my whole life. My great aunt, she had to be 90 years old when I met her. Aunt Homogeneous. Why are you laughing? I can tell by the looks on your faces you are questioning my veracity. I swear it is everlasting gospel. I got a great Aunt Homogeneous. I wouldn't swear to everything in this story, but I'll swear to that. You see, her father was a farmer, and he was a man of no schooling, but he liked to live above his raising, you know, put on airs. And so he went to Memphis once, as far as I know, only time in his life, and he heard the word homogeneous while he was up there. And he liked the sound of it. And the story goes he went to his grave not knowing what that word meant. But he liked the sound so much, he gave it as a gift to his daughter. Homogeneous Clementine Rosalia Greer. He used to tell her she had the name of a duchess. Duchess Homogeneous. She was a great quilter, too, I got to tell you. So, but that wasn't the aunt that was coming to visit. Aunt Homogeneous wasn't coming. No, we had Aunt Cordy. She was a real standout, too. Aunt Cordy, she lived way back in a holler, and she lived in a plank wall house. That house had not known a spot of paint in its whole life. Her husband had built it for her in the 20s. And when we'd go visiting and sit in the front room, you could look through the gaps in those planks and see outside. And in the heat of Mississippi, not even an electric fan for cooling. Yeah, it was hot. It was hot. So Aunt Cordy, she was also kind of old school. She smoked a pipe, and she dipped snuff. And the snuff was important to us because my grandmother, see, the snuff came in these big, heavy, beveled juice glasses, and my grandmother collected those from Aunt Cordy. So we always had to go visit Aunt Cordy and get the latest haul of snuff cups. I still got one of them, too. They're pretty nice glasses. So anyway, Aunt Cordy, I don't want you to have the wrong impression. Aunt Cordy was a moral woman. She lived like most of my family. She lived in a dry county. You know what that is? Ain't no liquor. No liquor. And she was a dedicated teetotaler. And she could hold forth with the best of them on the evils of distilled spirits. But like most of the little old ladies in the area, she also had under her sink a gallon jug. It was medicine. Now, you and I, we would recognize it as sherry. And whenever we went to visit, we'd have to carry her over to Tupelo. See, that's in a heathen county. And we would replenish her medicine while we were in Tupelo. Now, you might rightfully ask, why was that medicine and not sherry? Well, that's a good question. And Aunt Cordy got that question a lot, and she liked to answer it too. Because she carried around with her a prescript. That's what she called it, a prescript. She had a prescript from a doctor, and she was real proud of it. She'd carry it around most every place she went, and she loved to have the opportunity to pull it out. She was tickled, particularly when there was some new person that she could get to read it out for her. And so she'd pull that thing out, and it was old, worn, brown paper, had to be decades old. And you'd read it and say, 1 glass sherry as needed, DX. Now that's what the doctor writes for because. 1 glass sherry as needed because Billy Rakestraw is a jackass. Bill is her late husband. And if you know anything about Southern culture, you know what she said next. In a very solemn voice, she would always say, bless his heart. But it tickled her. Oh, me, it tickled her when somebody new got to hear that prescript. But she wasn't the one coming to visit either. See, something else funny, too. When Dad finished putting up those vent covers, do you remember that's where the story started with the vent covers? When he finished putting those up, he didn't stop there. He put these big old boards over the windows of the house. It made it look kind of like Aunt Cordy's plank-walled house. And on the radio, they were talking about the woman coming to visit us. And I thought, well, my family must be pretty important. They're talking about my aunt on the radio. Well, it was 1969, and the woman who was coming to visit, her name was Camille. Well, some of you obviously know your history, because Camille was not the aunt that my little mind had conjured. Camille was a hurricane, one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to come ashore in the United States, 190-mile-an-hour winds. That's sustained winds. The gusts, they don't know, because there was not a wind gauge in the whole Gulf Coast could measure the gusts for Camille. So my mother, she finished with the house, and she started packing up the station wagon. We had a nice, relatively new Oldsmobile Cutlass station wagon with the fake wood siding on it. It was nice. And so my older brother and my older sister and I, we all piled in the back, you know, the way back. We piled in the way back of that station wagon, and we ran. We lit out. Problem was, we ran to Mississippi, where the family was. Because you see, Camille, at that last minute, Camille turned and missed New Orleans. Camille kicked Mississippi square in the teeth. People in Manitou know about floodwaters. Camille had a storm surge. You know, that's where the water's everywhere, not just in one channel. Storm surge 24 feet high. Higher than a 2-story building. 259 people died. And that's where we were. And it was, well, there's a lot of wet. There was a lot of wind. And there was a whole lot of scared. And I remember at one point we were out of the car. And the family, we were tucked up in under the arms of a bridge. There was a whole bunch of other people around with us. And what I want to tell you about tonight is my dad. See, he was there and he was doing what he always did. He was plugging away, calm as could be, trying to make things better for everybody around him. You know, getting them situated so they were in the best shelter, that kind of thing. Calm as could be. Well, we got through, Camille. No worse the wear for the experience. Mainly what we walked away with was a good story, and that's all any Southerner ever asked for. And we went back to New Orleans, of course, and we lived there many more years. And my brother, though, he was kind of sickly. He what they call out here a lunger. And so like all those TB immigrants of yore, we moved to the mountains for that fresh, clean, healthy air. Helped my brother, and it did, by the way. We came out, and over the next decade, our family, we had some really big ups. And we had kind of some rocky downs, too. Lost our house at one point. And then fast forward, we got to when I was in high school. And it was getting to be time to make plans for when high school was over. And I had big plans. Ooh, I had big plans for an expensive program at a private college. Oh, it was going to be really something. And then my dad had the job of sitting me down and talking to me about the facts of life. And before I tell you what he said, I got to tell you, it was kind of a hard time in the family right then. And one of the biggest challenges was that, see, my mother, she had taken ill again. And in the family, in the house, we could all hear the beating of the wings of the angel of death. So Dad was kind of under pressure. Wasn't maybe at his best. And when he sat me down, all he really did was talk to me about the things he could not provide. He said, I don't have any money to give you, and there's not going to be a private college program. And then he said, I have no name to give you. And that's his Southern perspective. What he meant was, I don't have any social standing to help you get started, and I don't have any friends who are connected who are going to help you get your start in life. It was kind of his way of saying, I'm sorry, but you're on your own. You know, it was a long time later before I finally had my own children, and I realized how that conversation hurt him. Well, fast forward another few years, and I had worked my way through college, just like my dad. And I had gone on to get a higher degree, and I had a job, had a start on a good career, and I went back to visit my dad. I went out with him on his chore that day. See, there was an old widow woman living up a ways, and she was having trouble with her drain line. So Dad went over to put in a new one, and I went along to help. Really, I watched. And I realized two things that day when I was watching him. One, after 20 years, just watching him still fascinated me. What a guy. Doing the same thing he always did. Just plugging away, making things better for the people around him. And then I realized a second thing, and that was just how wrong he had been that day we talked in high school. Because what he forgot when he told me all the things he couldn't give me is he forgot the most important thing. And that's what he gave me, which was his example. And you know, that example, that turned out to be worth, that was worth more than all the mansions of all the aunts in all the world. Y'all have a good evening.